Well everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the OnePlus 8 and see if this particular device is still worth buying in 2024. Now, for those of you who don't know, the OnePlus 8 was one of those phones that the OnePlus company made back in 2020, and I will tell you from that particular year onwards, OnePlus did a really good job in 2020. They did an excellent job in 2019, and then after this they kind of started doing some weird stuff, but this was one of my most favorite phones probably back in 2020, and I think overall these phones have held up and aged pretty well. They're not perfect or anything, but I do think for the most part, OnePlus did a pretty decent job, and we'll talk about that, how good of a job or how bad of a job they did in some areas. But if you want to pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. So starting off with the outside of the OnePlus 8, you can basically see that this particular phone on the front side is giving you a 6.55-inch fluid AMOLED display. It's a 90Hz panel, and overall it was a very, very good, decent panel that OnePlus was making at this time. And I will tell you the things that I loved the most about this particular phone at that time were basically the fact that this phone was giving you a 90Hz panel inside of a phone that was smaller than the most expensive one. Before this, I think the year before this, there were some phones that were giving you 90Hz panels, but Apple still hadn't caught up to it. And even this year, Apple didn't make a 120 Hz panel either. They still kept 60 Hz. So the fact that these phones were giving us 90 and 120 Hz panels were super nice, and that was something I actually appreciated a lot about these particular devices. So I do think this in and of itself was a really nice thing going on here. So I think the panel of this thing is nice, hole punch display, curved panel as well. It's a really, really nice thing, and OnePlus made some really big improvements within this particular device from that particular perspective, which was actually super cool. So I will tell you on the front side, definitely gets a thumbs up from me. On the sides, like I said, it's a curved side. On the bottom, you're getting this USB Type-C port, which is great. So you can go ahead and basically just, plug in some, accessories in this thing if you want to. So that in and of itself was a really nice thing going on there. And on the back side, you were also getting this frosted glass back. So the frosted glass back was beautiful. I loved having that, which was super cool. And I do think, if I'm going through and buying a certain device, it's really, really nice to have that type of capability because it feels so nice and it holds up so well. Almost every single major flagship has some sort of frosted glass back, and I do think this in and of itself is a very cool thing going on here. And I do think if I'm going through buying a phone, it's easily one of my most favorite things going on for this particular device. So once again, that in of itself is a very, very cool thing going on for this particular phone. On top of that, this phone's still giving you a lot of things that you'd get in phones nowadays, like, the good display, 90 Hz, all that stuff. There are two things within this phone that a lot of phones have nowadays that this phone does not have, which is very eye-opening. This phone does not have any IP certification, which I think is, kind of weird. I feel like this phone, even in 2020, should have gotten it. I understand why they didn't do it, is to save money or whatever, but still, I feel like this phone at the end of the day should have gotten that type of capability. And it was very, very strange that this phone did not get any sort of feature like that. On top of that, another big thing going on for this particular phone is the fact that there basically, isn't any reverse wireless charging, which, is kind of crazy. iPhones don't have it either, so it's whatever. This phone doesn't even have any standard wireless charging either. So that in and of itself is kind of a little bit of a downside, I would say, for this particular device. If you're going through and buying some sort of phone like this, you would probably expect it to have some sort of feature set like that, and that is not what's going on here. So that is kind of a downside for this particular phone too. It isn't a terrible phone, and there still is a lot of capability and a lot of quality going on for this particular device when it comes down to it. But definitely within something like the iPhones, of that year, or the Samsung Galaxies of that year, I think they're definitely giving you more, those phones are giving you IP certification and wireless charging. This phone really wasn't giving you those things, which is kind of sad. So that kind of covers it up there. Now, from the camera side of things, this phone is basically giving you a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, a 16 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and then a 2 megapixel macro lens. On the front side, it's giving you a 16 megapixel sensor. So the thing I'll tell you here too, OnePlus, as good of a phone they could have made, the cameras aren't really that great. That is kind of the downside that you're getting with this particular phone. So with these particular devices, you're basically getting a very, very somewhat limited type of experience. Not as limited, it's just not as good of a camera as the other competition. And that is how I feel like when you're getting one of these types of phones, I feel like you could be doing a better job overall with something like the Samsung or iPhone of that year. For example, this phone can give you 4K at 60 on the back, which is great. I love 4K at 60. I think it's a really, really good version of, it's good, resolution and everything you could film in. But 1080p on the front is kind of a harder thing to justify. I feel like you would need to have 4K on the front in some form or fashion in order to make this thing somewhat even worth it. And once again, this in and of itself is another somewhat of a downside that you might be getting with this particular phone. So that in of itself kind of gets a thumbs up. The backside gets a thumbs up for me. The fact that it has a type of I/O and everything is really cool, but I kind of feel weird about it in a way because this particular phone, just from that side, from as far as I can tell, just really isn't doing that great of a job from the camera side of things. So take it as you will, but when I see this phone and I actually mess with it, that was the one thing that kind of stood out to me, and it is kind of one of those minor issues I kind of experienced within this particular device. So from that side, I would say from the camera side, that kind of covers it up there for the most part. Now on top of that, this particular phone from the software side was actually pretty decent. This phone, ended off with Android 13, which really isn't that bad of a version to end off with in terms of software. Like, I could have definitely seen a lot of phones doing a worse job from the software side, and I definitely think from this particular side, it's not a bad performing phone from the software perspective, but it did already end. So if you're planning on buying a phone and using it on an everyday basis, this phone is already done getting software, for the most part. There might be some security updates or whatnot, but this phone is basically done getting software. So I would hate for you to go and buy a phone if it's already done getting software support. And that's exactly how I feel about this particular device. Like, you are much better off buying a device that's still supported with software and everything like that. And that's just kind of how I feel. And with this particular phone, it's just kind of what it is, right? It's not the biggest deal in the world, but if you are buying a phone, that's just one of the issues that you might be experiencing with this particular phone. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there as well. Now, on top of that, within this particular phone, you're also going to be getting basically the chipset and the performance inside of this phone as well. So inside, it's giving you that Qualcomm Snapdragon 865 chipset inside with 6 or 8 or 12 gigabytes of RAM. That is a massive amount of RAM difference for the most part. And I will tell you, I had basically the base model, the 6 gigabyte of RAM option. And back in 2020, it was also very nice. Like, I didn't really have that many complaints about this particular phone from that side. But moving up a notch, this phone is also going to be giving you somewhat of a weirder experience, I will tell you, from, basically from the performance nowadays. It's not a terrible performing phone. And for basic applications, big applications, it's going to be able to, open those apps and download those apps. But definitely keep in mind that as this phone gets older and older and older, there might be some situations where this phone isn't really going to be doing that great because it's kind of coming to its end of life because of the software. So I definitely would tell you the performance really is not that bad, and it's kind of a good thing going on for this particular phone when it comes down to it as well. So overall, what I'll definitely tell you, I look at a phone like the OnePlus 8, and I think there was a lot of love with this phone, and I think OnePlus did a really good job with it. But I think with some of the corners that they cut have aged terribly within this particular phone. Things like lack of IP certification, lack of reverse and standard wireless charging. I think those things are pretty big downsides. The camera on this thing is mid, it's like okay enough, and the performance is good, but there's nothing really calling me for like me looking at this phone and like buying it. I'd rather buy like a Samsung Galaxy S20 of that year rather than this phone, I feel like, or a Galaxy S20 Plus. You might as well even go for a Samsung Galaxy S21. Those phones are going to be significantly better, I feel like, than these phones. So overall, that's kind of how I feel this particular phone holding up in 2024. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.